In fact, Phil Jackson, the legendary basketball coach of the Chicago Bulls and then Los Angeles Lakers, said, focusing on winning is a loser's game because you get distracted. Focus on the process. Are we performing at our best? Are we playing to our practice? Even if we lose, it's okay. I care if you performed at your very best. How do you build an ambition, but then don't have a daily counter on the wall and say, now we know the process we need to follow because outcomes are a byproduct of the pursuit of excellence. How do you keep the focus on the process and not so much fixated on the outcome? You want to build a great organization that totally crushes it?
The fifth principle is process. Ranjay, you are very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast. Delighted and thrilled to have you on the show today. It's been a while coming.
Thank you, Brendan. Pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, looking forward to a great conversation. We've already had a wonderful conversation off air, so looking forward to this one. So, you know, we're very aligned on this. Our vision is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small to medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So, Ranjay, in 2025, what does scaling with purpose mean to you?
You know, scaling has been a question that has been near and dear to me for more than a decade. And I have had my own journey into this question. And it's interesting. I love scaling with purpose. I wish I had thought of it a decade ago. Would have saved me a lot of pain and trouble. My first foray into scaling was that business leaders struggle to put structure and systems in place early enough. They delay it. They like the informality of the organization. And so I wrote an article in Harvard Business Review called Building Startups That Last. And that one was really focused on kind of how do you put in place what structure systems. Then I got a little pushback from friends of mine who run companies saying, Ranjay, you missed something. And I was like, okay, what did I miss? And they said, you missed the idea that when you put in place these structure and systems, you kill something in the business. And I'm like, what do you kill? Oh, it's this informality and this and that, and the foosball tables, the ping pong, and everyone knows everybody, and we hang out together. So I then went on a hunt and I studied over 60 companies that have grown super fast in a 5 to 10 year period, and to understand what is this thing you lose when you scale up. And that led me to write a second article called The Soul of a Startup. And in The Soul of a Startup, I talk about 3 dimensions they touched on. One was customer connection, this deep commitment to customers that exists in smaller organizations. The second was employee experience. How do employees felt that they had voice and choice, discretion and voice in there. And the third was this sense of purpose, this idea that you're going to do something to not just save the planet, but really you are doing something to change a business, change a market, transform customers. You are on a transformational journey of some kind rather than just I want to sell a new widget. So I kind of got that. So I wrote that article. And then I got some more feedback from my friend. And they said, Ranjay, that's great, but you need to double click into that last item. And that led me to write a third article called How Great Companies, Great Startups Go from Big Ideas to Grand Ideals. That they find some kind of a purpose in this journey. And how they use that purpose to invigorate themselves as entrepreneurs and founders, but also to invigorate others who are working with them. And this gets harder and harder as you scale up because things get more diffuse and KPIs come into play and they don't always align with your purpose. So, now it gets more confusing. So that was kind of my foray into this topic. And now I'm coming to the next piece of this puzzle, which is courage, how to be bold. So it's a kind of an arc of a journey for me.
I absolutely love that. And you've touched on a number of the principles which we codify in our ScaleX 10 principle framework. Just staying on purpose for a moment, because for those listening, you'll not see me hold up one of Ranjay's wonderful books called Deep Purpose, the Heart and Soul of High Performance Companies. Now, this was published, if I'm correct, 3 years ago.
That's
Given
right.
we're 3 years on, this was certainly the topic du jour when this came out. Do you still hold the belief, and does the research support that actually those companies who have their scaling ambition anchored in purpose are actually outperforming those who don't?
So let's even ask ourselves from a commonsensical perspective. I'm just going to put my common sense practical hat on. It's very important to first understand that purpose is not a purpose statement. People confuse having a purpose with writing a mission statement. It's much bigger than that. The mission statement is just a physical manifestation, representation of some ideas you have in a set of words, right? I mean, if you read Microsoft's purpose statement, it's about how to empower others to achieve more. Come on, give me a break, right? But what we don't catch is the months and months the leadership team spent debating to get to those words, how they use that exercise to naturally sharpen their strategic thinking and where their focus is going to be. What we also don't get is how they use those words in all conversations that they have now about budgeting, R&D, resource allocation, and a whole bunch of other things. So, what happens is we get fixated and we don't even know what having a purpose means. And that, I think, is the starting point for a conversation. So I think that is, you know, and if I look beyond that, what is purpose then? Purpose is fundamentally having a long-term view of your business, right? Because the very question of purpose forces you to think long-term. Who am I? Who do I want to be? Why am I here? The why question forces you to really think hard about the what and the how question, but with a long term lens. Because why naturally forces you to imagine possibility for yourself, not just, I want to have a liquidity event and I want to, you start to ask a broader question. Why is this business and why does this business need to be? Why does the world need this business? So I think purpose forces you to think about building in a more enduring business with long-term legs on it. So it's not a short-term play. Are there short-term plays out there? Absolutely. There's so many out there, and I don't begrudge them anything. That's a different kind of play. But if your intention is to really unlock long-term value and build something enduring, an institution that outlasts you even, you got to think about purpose. Because purpose is what? Why am I here? And the why question suddenly centers your focus on what's our strategy? What's our go to market? Right? What's our TAM, total addressable market? And then it gets to the how question. How are we going to do it? How are we going to build up? How are we going to hire, grow? What's our customer acquisition strategy? All the cascading questions that come naturally rooted in a why question.
And focusing on that, how to scale with purpose, you have dedicated the last number of years researching how to be bold, because courage undergirds the how. I really feel, the bolder we are, the I feel the higher the probability that we'll actually widen our reach and deepen our impact. What I'm curious to know before we celebrate and acknowledge and dive into your latest book is your story. What do we need to know about your story that has driven you or has acted as the catalyst for you to get curious and explore the whole subject of courage?
So, it's interesting. When you write a book, you have to also introspect, like, why did I write this book now? And sometimes it takes you back into your past beyond things you even have in your immediate recesses of your memory. You have to really dig hard. So when I was first writing it, it seemed like a natural sequel to Purpose. I was looking at organizations that had purpose. They had courage to take bold decisions. They seemed to be more bold in their actions. I didn't have any data to back it up. And it also took courage to have a purpose, and purpose gave you more courage. So it seemed like purpose, courage interact. I teach a class MBA course on turnarounds and transformations. To lead a turnaround or a transformation, you need to have courage. You need to make some very, very difficult decisions and some choices. Those require courage. I had written an HBR article on what do companies do in down markets. And I found that 9% of companies actually invest for growth, only 9%. The rest all cut costs. And the ones that do come out of the recession much stronger. So it's called roaring out of recessions. So I thought, okay, yeah, this is kind of like courage is kind of the natural pull into these, helping me further understand what I'm observing about courage. And I was really focused on organizational courage. So, I wasn't thinking individual at all. But as I delved into the topic further and I wrote the book, honestly, I was almost done with the book when I had to reflect, like, why and when did I first observe courage myself? And I remember two stories that came back to me that I had actually forgotten. The first one was about my father. My father was, he passed away a few years ago. I had to go back and pack up his belongings in India. It was, I had a great relationship with him. He had a long, healthy, good life. But still, packing up his things was a little emotional. And as I packed up his things, I had suddenly a recall of a story I had forgotten since I was 10 years old. So he was in the military, so I was packing up his military uniforms. And I remember a story from when I was 10 years old. India had been in a bloody war. He was in the military intelligence, so he was in a special ops unit behind enemy lines. Dangerous mission. He came back, thankfully, one piece. Anyway, I'm 10 years old. I'm watching James Bond movies, and I'm kind of proud of my dad. And I asked him, Dad, one day I was out for a walk with him, and I said, Dad, when you were out there, were you scared? Now, what's the answer I was looking for? I was looking for an answer saying no. And my dad, being very, very, he was just a very honest, transparent person, said, Son, it was actually very scary. We were behind enemy lines. We had no supply lines. We had no extraction plan. And we had lost the element of surprise. The biggest thing was we were supposed to be undercover and surprise them, but they had found out about our plan, which means that they were on our tail. So it was a very dangerous mission. It was scary at times, but I had a job to do. I was responsible for my people. I was responsible for my country. So we did it, and they successfully accomplished their mission. I just couldn't get over this. I just could not register when my father said that he was scared. This was so disappointing. I took a long time to I can't believe he was scared. And it took me decades really to realize that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is taking action in the face of fear. The fact that and Nelson Mandela talked about it, Mahatma Gandhi, so that was my first kind of awakening into the topic. And I also learned subsequently that, you can become courageous. Mahatma Gandhi, early in his life, was not anything but courage. He was actually fearful of public speaking. And he wanted to have nothing to do with nationalist India. He wanted to be an Englishman. He moved to London to become a barrister. He dressed like an Englishman. He talked and walked like an Englishman. He wanted to be English. It was only him going to South Africa and getting booted off a train because he wasn't white that suddenly it had this awakening in him. Right? So it's not like Nelson Mandela was not courageous early in his life either. So you look at these people, they somehow are able. Then I did some research on, there's some research on bomb disposal squads and paratroopers in World War II, British paratroopers and bomb disposal squads in World War II. And these psychologists who've interviewed them found that they were scared going into the jobs. But somehow over time, they found a way to deal with that fear. So my other awakening was that, courage is taking action in the face of fear. I kind of sort of knew that. There's so many, Mark Twain talked about it. There's so many literary people who've talked about it. But then the other learning was, can you become courageous? And we can talk about that too.
Absolutely, and I would love for us to do a little mini masterclass on that today. And you've provided that wonderful definition of courage. What I'm hearing is that purpose and courage are first cousins. Something I love to explore with you before we get into the the book and the nine C's of courage, but lack of ambition of the leader is cited as the single greatest impediment as to why only 0.5% of small and medium-sized enterprises um, achieve scale. So more than 99% of those businesses, those SMEs, which represent more than 99% of businesses by volume, more than 70% of people who are in the workforce are working for SMEs. So these businesses are critically important. I feel that those leaders who scale with purpose have the power to change the world, not only themselves, their teams, their organizations, but their community, society, and economies at large. And so the prize and offer is significant when we get to leaders who are conscious around scaling with purpose, but sadly less than 1% currently achieving that, and lack of ambition of the leader is cited as the greatest impediment. What's your view, Ranjay, of the interplay between courage and ambition?
It's a great question. So let's look at ambition. Um, Here's the thing is we sometimes equate ambition with outcome. I want to be big. I want to be $100 million company with an IPO that's $1 billion IPO. I want this. I want an outcome. And trust me, goals motivate. It's one having a goal is better than having no goal at all. And having big goals is better than having small goals. But let me go back again over here. In the organizations I studied, the ones that were really courageous, they had conviction. And the conviction was not only about a goal per se, it was about an ideal. We believe we can transform the way this is done. And that conviction is infectious. It's contagious. Everybody around then buys into that vision. And what we know from decades of research is what are the antidotes for fear? So, what is courage? Courage is action in the face of fear. Fear is a primal human emotion hardwired in the primitive brain. It's what keeps us alive. It's what kept our ancestors alive. So we have to deal with something that is so hardwired in the hardware of the brain that you got to have something to counter that. Having I want to grow $100 million ain't going to counter fear. But I want to transform something and I want to do something big. That's a possibility. I mean, Alexei Navalny going back to Russia, even though he might get killed, because he wanted to build a bold, beautiful, prosperous Russia. Now, maybe that how a startup entrepreneur might say, what does that do for me? But I think is you have to think of yourself, what is my ambition? How do I even craft it? Do I have to talk about it in terms of outcomes or an ideal of something big I want to accomplish? That's the first piece of the puzzle. The other one I want to share with you, which I thought was really interesting to me, I had not thought about before, I picked up from sports coaches. A number of coaches I interviewed said, we don't talk about winning. In fact, Phil Jackson, the legendary basketball coach of the Chicago Bulls and then Los Angeles Lakers, said, focusing on winning is a loser's game because you get distracted. Focus on the process. Are we performing at our best? Are we playing to our practice? We practice this. Are we playing to perfection? Are we playing well? Even if we lose, it's okay. Another coach I talked to said, you know what? The worst thing that happens to a team is you win by playing badly. I don't care if you win or lose. I care if you performed at your very best. How do you build an ambition, but then don't have a daily counter on the wall and say, now we know the process we need to follow because outcomes are a byproduct of the pursuit of excellence. How do you keep the focus on the process and not so much fixated on the outcome? I think these are not easy tasks. So it's great to say, let's be ambitious. Let's set an ambitious BHAG, bold, hairy, audacious goal. Let's put it on the wall. Let's have a daily counter. How's our sales going? Okay, it's 1 million today, or it's 2 million tomorrow. And let's see how far we can take this thing. It works. It does work. I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm just not sure it gets you to greatness. You want to build a great organization that totally crushes it, you got to think differently about ambition.
And you've spoken directly to a number of the principles that we've codified. The fifth principle is process, the sixth principle is performance, and the second principle is purpose and vision. I want to come to the first principle, which is psyche. It's focusing around on the mindset of the leader. And I love this book. I feel it's so timely. How to be bold. So what you're suggesting and what I'm hearing from you, Ranjay, is that actually courage is not necessarily innate. It's something that can be cultivated. And what we've touched on so far in the conversation is that actually the deeper your purpose, the greater the probability that you'll be more courageous. And sharing that beautiful story from your dad. I mean, he was serving something greater than himself, and with that there was deep meaning and purpose, which actually cultivated or served to cultivate courage. The 9 C's of courage, you split them into 2 parts. So let's kick off with how to build our courage muscles, because I feel this will be super practical for our listeners who are, in the context of scaling, facing challenges every day, and having a practical framework to lean on, I feel will serve to support them in actually achieving their scaling ambition. So you kick off with coping. What do you mean by coping?
So 30 seconds back up here. Why do we need to think about this? What triggers fear is uncertainty. Uncertainty is not the same as risk. Risk is where you know the distribution of outcomes. Uncertainty is unknowns. What's happening in the world around us today, technologically, socially, geopolitically, politically, in a whole bunch of ways, uncertainty is rife. That's why we're saying there's an uncertainty crisis, is what Harvard Business Review said in the last issue. That means there's a lot of fear. Now, being an entrepreneur is a fearful task to begin with, so you got to first find a way to tame that fear, not succumb to it. You may normalize it, you may tame it, you may even outwit it. But how do you not succumb to it? So it's all about kind of now, how do you face your fear? That's what courageous people do, right? They learn to look at fear in the eye and still go forward. Now, you may try to dampen it a little bit and say, how do I dampen it, gather more information, get more data? But sometimes you got to still go into the fog of uncertainty, right? And it's important to remember that courage is not natural. The normal, natural response is to be scared. And fear is this primitive emotion in us. So cowardice, which we all vilify, is normal. I actually read a book where there was a whole chapter on what they called the good coward. Cowards are not necessarily bad people. They just succumb to their fears, right? But how do you take on fear? I mean, Tom Cruise does many of his own stunts. When he was asked, are you scared? And he said, it's not that I'm not afraid. It's I'm okay with being afraid. How do you do that? And I think that's what I want to talk about with you. So the first piece of the puzzle, which you call coping, is it starts with an understanding that our own behavior as human beings originates from 2 sources. One is calculative Cost benefit analysis, rational, do the math, expected value, should I, shouldn't I, pros and cons, SWOT analysis, scenario planning. You take action. The other one is what we call interpretive. Interpretive behavior is meaning, tradition, emotion. And that also riles us up. So I interviewed a Ukrainian commando who was a mergers and acquisitions lawyer till a couple of years ago, and he volunteered. He didn't have to go. He's now a frontline, behind enemy lines commando. And he just felt he had to do it. And what you discover is these people dial into two things: their own sense of self and their understanding of the situation. Self is identity, situation is meaning. It's the sense of self and situation that compels them to do something in spite of fear. I need to do something. And purpose is one of those resources, not the only, but one of those resources you can tap into. So you use this coping system is one of saying, why am I here? I was meant to do something and I'm going to do it. In Captain Sullenberger, this pilot who landed a plane on the Hudson River,
Incredible.
he said, I realized my entire life up to that moment was a preparation for that moment. Now, is he going to wimp out now? I mean, it's not going to happen. So you start to see how people make sense of themselves and the situation they're in. And it's no longer only about the cost benefit. Cost benefit, yes, but more than that.
So, giving yourself or telling yourself a story that helps actually lean into the fear is so critically important. Just open up the this understanding of sense of self. So what do you mean by that? Just such that it's not abstract for our listeners. What if they're facing they're I'm coaching a young CEO at the moment. He's facing a challenge in his business that potentially means a restructuring. Where does the sense of self come into play to support him in telling himself a different story right now?
So I think most of us, actually all of us, every day are telling ourselves a story, our own self narrative. This is who I am. This is what I do. This is what I'm good at. I can't do this. This, I like this. I don't like that. This is just not my thing. I'm a victim. Look at how the world is out to get me. Or the world is not out to get me. Or the world is a threat. Or the world is an opportunity. So we all have a narrative. Now, where it comes from, nature, nurture, there's a lot of debates on that one. But what we do know is that if you want to change things, you got to change your story. And it starts by understanding your story. I'll just give you a simple example of this. Maybe that'll illustrate to you. One of the gentlemen I interviewed is a guy named Brandon Say. Brandon, he's a young 26, 27-year-old man who was working as a cashier in his family business, which is a dance hall in Southern California. And he, by his own account, is a pacifist. He never ever got into a fight. He's slightly built, he's mild mannered. That's just not his thing. In fact, he had even joked with his friend one time that if ever we encounter some violent mass shooter, what would you do? And they both agreed they would run or duck. Well, guess what happens on that evening? He's there, and a guy with a gun walks into the lobby. And he's behind the cashier window. He sees this guy walking in. By the way, that gunman had already shot up another dance hall. So he walks in, this guy sees him. Now he's thinking, should I duck and hide under the table? Maybe he won't see me and he'll just carry on into the dance hall. Or should I do something? Meaning, come out of the cashier's little cubicle and confront the guy. Now you can see what's going on in his head, right? He didn't even understand why He just came out and got into a fight with the gunman. The gunman punched this guy pretty badly, but somehow he hangs in there and manages to pull the gun away from the gunman and then points it at the gunman and gets him out of there. And by the way, finding this gun then allowed the police to identify the gunman and track him down before he could do more harm. So, the media portrayed him as a hero. He just said, I don't know why I did it. I just did it. It was an impulse thing. I probed with him. I said, like, I need to understand you a little better. Like, what's the story here? Like, what's your story? I don't know why nobody asked him that. And what emerged was this dance hall was his grandmother's dance hall. She ran it all her life till she passed. His mother ran it all her life till she passed. He was like a custodian of this dance hall. He was like and his mother had just died a few years earlier, and his mother had done a lot to raise him. And by the way, everyone in the dance hall were people he knew since he was a kid. And so the thought, he said, I was just thinking, what would my mother say if she saw me hiding under a chair or a table? And he said, I had no choice. I had to do something. Do you see? So in a moment, he rewrote his story. I think we can be more intentional about that. What's my story? Why am I here?
Yeah, we come back to that sense of meaning and purpose again, which was clearly strong in this case, which helped rewrite the story in the moment. That makes so much sense. So moving to the second C, confidence. How do we build confidence that seeds courageous actions in the face of fear?
So you know what happened was when I was writing the chapter on confidence, I was cringing. In fact, I didn't want to call it confidence. I just couldn't find a better C word because I was thinking confidence is like the ultimate cliche. You have more confidence. Really? I mean, I don't need, nobody needs to hear me tell, or anybody tell them, find more confidence. But actually, the research is fascinating. And the research is fascinating because if you try to understand what confidence is, it really originates in two forms. One is domain specific knowledge. I'm the master of my craft. I know this stuff. I'm a tech expert, or I'm a marketing guru, or I'm a sales whiz. I got it, right? I can handle no matter what comes my way. I'm a domain expert. But actually, some foundational research by a Stanford psychologist, Albert Bandura, really showed there's a meta skill beneath it, which is what he calls kind of a can do spirit. In fact, he called it self efficacy. That no matter what comes my way, I can do it. It doesn't matter, curveball, this, that, and the other. And I think naturally, most entrepreneurs, not all, have that in them. But that's what is going to come in handy. So as you're resourcing yourself, you're saying to yourself, you know what? I don't care whatever comes my way. Great. AI is going to blow up the sector. Geopolitical uncertainty is going to change the supply chains and my procurement costs. And, I'm going to have labor market issues as we think about where labor markets are going. Interest rates are going down or up. I don't know, sideways. I got it.
And
And
it,
that is what confidence really is. It's like this, I got it.
is it an attitude, Ranjay, or is there something deeper that that actually undergirds having that confident attitude? Or practically, are we are we building evidence along the way which suggests that in this moment of fear, I can lead confidently because I've been here before. Look at all of the undeniable times, the demonstrable evidence which suggests actually this situation is one that I've dealt with in a different guise in the past, as opposed to maybe the other interpretation of just being cocky without actually substance. So, is there anything practically that we can do that actually, from a confidence lens, we can support it with demonstrable evidence?
It's a great question, Brendan. First is Aristotle, who wrote one of the first essays on courage, distinguished between recklessness and courageous behavior. Okay. So this is not at all to say let's be reckless. It's very thoughtful, deliberate, intentional action. But you're right that sometimes, that's why they say seasoned entrepreneurs are the best entrepreneurs because they've seen it before. Not the same thing. Rarely do serial entrepreneurs see exactly the same thing. But what they're building up is this meta skill. It's like a Navy SEAL. Navy SEALs don't train for exactly that particular form of war. They train for go in there and just like figure it out. So you work out all kinds of scenarios. You're being thrown all kinds of curveballs in your training. You're prepping. You're saying, what if? What if? Try this. This happens. The idea is to be comfortable with uncertainty. You gotta like calm the nerves down so you can face it. Firefighters do the same thing. Every fire is different. So
So let's
how do people, kind of embolden themselves in these moments? That I think is the real question mark.
let's come to the question of calm. I know it's the sixth C in terms of how to build our courage muscles, but you've mentioned calm, being calm, despite the fact that the house is burning down. What what can we do practically to seed this level of calm? Like I watched the movie, the where Captain Sullenberger landed that plane. He's the exemplar of calm. And even afterwards, when they put him on trial, how he maintained his composure and his calm. What did you find in your research was a consistent practice or thread in those people who demonstrated courage, when they're facing fear?
So, Brendan, it's interesting. In every kind of these C's, I actually found some compelling examples. And then I found social science research to help me understand that this is not just a one-off story. It was connected to some foundational social science research. So I'll give you some examples of stories, but the foundational research was by another Stanford psychologist, actually, James Gross, who studies emotional regulation. The idea that, emotions are powerful, hard charged, that activate the primitive brain, and how do we learn to tame them became the question. And then I found real life examples of people who, in the face of fear, still choose to act. For instance, let me go in a totally different context, okay? Out of business. Adele, who's an amazing singer,
Wonderful.
apparently she has stage fright. So she practices a ritual. What does she do? She holds a picture of Celine Dion, her aspired hero, before she does her own concerts. And she looks at Celine and says, if she's done it, I don't know what her mental talk is. She's never told anybody that. But that's what she does, right? So you're trying to build rituals around that. Um, you know, Related to rituals, you also can engage in what is called selective attention. You're redirecting attention away from, so if you look at rituals in Captain Sullenberger's case, pilots always go to their checklist. Even in that moment, what did Captain Sullenberger do? He went to his checklist. He said, he's talking to the ground staff, telling them ground control, telling them what the situation is. He's then going through, okay, we're going to land in the Hudson. Once he decides that, he's already now playing out the checklist in his mind. Got to land with the wings exactly level, with the nose slightly up, above the minimum flying speed, but not below the flying speed, but not too high. And I got to land the plane near where the boat is, where the boats are, so rescue can happen quickly. So he's working the ritual of the checklist that is ritualized for these pilots. The next one is selective attention. Don't get distracted. How do you tune out the noise? Katie Ledecky, legendary swimmer, right? probably won more medals than any other woman in modern history. Whenever she's kind of losing focus, she starts reciting her grandmother's name, right? Or in the case of back to Captain Sullenberger, they asked like, he said, "Were you thinking about the passengers? Were you thinking about people who might die? Were you thinking about your family?" Katie Couric asked him this question. He's like, "I was just focused on landing the plane." So, how do you do that? A third one is reframing the situation, where you frame it not as like, oh my God, a crisis. Why is it happening to me? What am I going to do? You know, the framing in Captain Sullenberger's mind was my entire life up to this moment was a preparation for this moment. This is my moment. Hey, buddy, are you going to step up or not? Right? And even flight anxiety, by the way, unrelated but related, flight anxiety training programs. I looked up those. British Airways and other airlines have training programs for people who are fearful of flying. Much of it is about reframing the flying, the odds of accidents, the safety of the planes. You're trying to reframe it for them. Oh, by the way, sometimes people use other ways of calming down. Ukraine, which is a very stressful place to live right now, it's very active comedy scene over there. In fact, in the beginning, early part of the war, in the first few weeks, the president, Zelensky, was having a conversation with David Letterman, and he was cracking joke. He cracked a joke.
Incredible.
So humor is another way in which, so in the book, I have a whole discussion about, um, you know, how athletes and business people look for. Simone Biles is another case that I look at, how she left the gymnastics and came back. How do you stay cool?
It's it's so interesting, the that ability to reframe in the moment and focus your attention away from the epicenter of what's going on and taming that innate emotional kind of chaotic response. It comes back, I feel, to the building a level of confidence that, in Captain Sullenberger's case, all of my training, all of the thousands of hours beforehand have led to this moment. That confidence seeds a level of calm. In terms of then connection, tell me about the importance of connection in relation to building our courage muscle.
So if you're an entrepreneur, I don't need to tell you this, but it can be pretty lonely, right? And one thing we know is, courage in particular and entrepreneurship too is not a solo sport. It takes a village, right? And so what you need is people who can support you. Now, again, you might say, Ranjay, give me a break. Did I have to listen to you to tell me that I need support? And I'm like, no, you didn't. But there's some great foundational research that helps us dimensionalize the types of support you may need. And it turns out support, the best kind of support, comes in 4 different flavors. The first one is resource support. My investor will give me money. The second form of support is informational support. Valuable information. Okay, fine, they're going to give me some information, intel as well, market intel, other intel, right? The third form of support is moral support. They're going to boost up my confidence. They're going to tell me I can do it. When somebody else believes in you, you believe in yourself more. They're going to say, I know, I love your idea. I love you. I love your team. You can do it. That's going to boost me up too. And the final one is appraisal support, feedback. Somebody who is not shy of telling me if I'm going of the project. We need those four forms of support. So if you are building a support squad for yourself, ask yourself, am I getting and I'm finding those four forms of support? Because if you're not, go find it. And by the way, this is a circular game. If you want it, you better be able to do it for others as well. So are you the right kind of support for others? And are you receiving the right kind of support? These become legitimate questions.
Yeah, this resonates so strongly, and again, captured in our own vision I shared with you right at the outset to inspire, connect, and enable ambitious leaders of SMEs to scale with purpose. And for me, it always seemed the natural thing to do to create this community, to create this club that would champion and cheerlead one another whilst we're supporting the entrepreneurs, the leaders in our community with capability around the knowledge and also the resources as well. Part of our ecosystem, we have established a fund uh, to support those who require it with growth capital. And so this connection piece, I didn't have this whenever I was leading, building and leading a scale up. And to your point, scaling is a lonely place. You live in your head a lot. But yet, at the same time, I was in a triathlon club. I couldn't swim, so I booked a triathlon as the goal. That was my ambition, and that was the motivation to get me swimming. I joined a triathlon club with this wonderful community of people who were championing, cheerleading, providing the moral support, providing the knowledge, the information. You know, here's how your bike should be set up. Here's the kind of swim strokes you need to be practicing. You know, they provided coaches to help with the swimming. And the moment you got involved in that club, everything just improved, and it improved because you were socializing and hanging around with people who, number one, wanted you to do well, were bringing everything that you set out here, the resources, the knowledge and info, the moral support. And because I trusted these people, they were able to give me feedback and to, the last few lengths there, you're doing this well, you're not doing this so well, change that. And so it made sense to me to create this scaling club, this community of like-minded leaders who had aspirations to better themselves, better their teams, better their organizations, and could share their challenges and also their ambition level in a safe place. So this one really, really resonates strongly. Commitment. Tell me about the importance of commitment in seeding courage.
Yeah. So commitment goes back in some ways to having conviction in some ways about an idea, right? And in its simplest form, it's about hold your beliefs high and act in consequence. So you kind of say, you pre-decide in advance your lines in the sand before the pressure hits. When values are clear, tough choices are easier to make. You can't do it in the moment if you don't have any principles to guide you, right? So it's really also easier to step up if you believe in a cause. I mean, we all want to, we talked about this earlier. We all want to experience meaning and purpose in our lives. And how do you tap into it? But it's really interesting how this plays out. The research shows that we all have in our minds an inner morality, a moral sensibility of what's right and wrong. And when we make that morality explicit around an endeavor, I am doing this because I really believe in it. Not only does it release the neurochemical oxytocin, which floods the brain, and when we feel empathy or connection with others that have been linked to altruistic actions, but it also creates what people have called moral potency. And along with it, it triggers a sense of felt responsibility. I have to do something. So, it's like one of the cases I talk about is this guy. He's a Ghanaian gentleman, Patrick Awua. He comes to the US, does the undergrad at Swarthmore, gets his dream job at Microsoft. Microsoft is in his early days of growth, makes a lot of money, and he's very happy with himself, living the good life in suburban Seattle. And he has this awakening that he's got to do something for Ghana, and he's going to build a university. He has no idea how. You got to get a license to do that, land, everything else. He goes to business school just to write a business plan, writes a business plan. And that's great. He does it. But that's not the most interesting part of the story. Along the way, he convinces one of his Japanese classmates who has never been to Africa, Nina Marini. She has no idea where Ghana is, but he convinces her that this was a moral quest and we were doing something special. And it's long odds, it's going to be very hard. And how this sense of moral quest and felt responsibility that if I don't do it, nobody else will, is another powerful propellant for dealing with fear.
Yeah, it seems again the seed of commitment is finding a deeper meaning, a deeper cause. The I shared this before with our audience, but prior to becoming 50 this year, I have had a personal training coach for some years, and I sent him pictures of the body that I wanted to have, the wonderful six pack that I was going to get for my 50th birthday party, and I sent it to him, and he came back and he said, yes, wonderful. This is great, and we can achieve this. And I went, brilliant. We're, 4 months out from my 50th birthday, and he said, but it's going to take a little bit of work. And I said, yeah, no, I understand that. I train most days, and so I'm comfortable with all of that. And he said, you're not going to have to do really that much more training, but we're going to really have to shake up your nutrition. So I said, okay, yeah, I understand what's involved. Can you share with me, give me a sense of what this would entail? So he sent back what the first kind of 4 to 6 weeks would look like, and I responded, I'm really not sure about this. And he said, well, that's the question that you've got to answer. Are you interested or are you committed? Because everyone's interested in having, well, the vast majority of men interested in getting fitter, stronger, healthier, and getting that the holy grail of the six pack. But are you committed? And that seems to be anchored in a deeper cause. Coming to the sixth and final C in relation to building our courage muscle, comprehension. What do you mean by comprehension, Ranjay?
So, comprehension is an interesting one. Back to uncertainty, lack of knowledge of what's going on around you. What is the typical response? The typical response is freeze or duck. What do we call freeze or flight? It's never fight or flight. Fight is rare. And I think the freeze response is most interesting to me because we psychologically somehow believe that doing nothing is the safest option until we have all the information and facts. Let's wait. Just wait and see how this plays out. Sometimes that's the prudent course of action. Yeah, let's do that. But sometimes doing nothing is the riskiest of all options. And doing something that might even turn out to be wrong may be the safer course of action because you learn something. So it's called this is a very famous Michigan psychologist named Carl Weick, who talked about acting your way into knowing. Sometimes you have to take action just to know what's going on. Back to my firefighter example that Carl Weick uses, a firefighter can't stand outside and say, let me see, let me get the data, then I'll decide what to do. No, he or she goes into the building, looks for cues, updates what's going on, decides on a new course of action, takes a few more steps into the building, again, gathers more cues and data. And so you're stepping your way into knowing. A lot of times, entrepreneurs need to have the capacity to recognize that, you can't wait. You have to act your way into knowing. This is so classic in so many contexts where you have to be willing to act your way into knowing. Um, so instead of thinking more, the answer is probe more.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, ultimately, we can consume lots of data, and in fact, with AI at our fingertips now, we can become PhD level, postgrads in any topic we wish in terms of the knowledge around that. But ultimately, we've got to act for ourselves to increase our knowledge, our comprehension, which ultimately gives us feedback, which is going to seed that courage. I love those. I love the six C's. I mean, they make sense, but in terms of embedding them into our day to day, Ranjay, is there anything practically that you can share with our listeners to, I suppose, practice developing this courage muscle?
So, look, here's the punchline, I think, for the whole project: courage is a choice. And and another piece I'll add is courage is hard, but you can resource yourself so that you're not immobilized by fear. And here is a pathway to how to resource yourself. Find the connections. Be willing to go in slowly and tiptoe your way into it, right? Find your conviction and change your story. How do you look to ways to keep calm in this context? These are all resource tools that I have found that people are not just like jumping into the unknown with no idea what's going on. They have the can do mindset, right? So, you've done a number of other things to resource yourself and then go into the fog. So I think it's important to understand that courage is a choice. Courage is knowable, and you need to be willing to say, I want to have courage. And I should just add one more thought here is that in research done where people have asked about regret in their life, people have much more regret about inaction than action. And I think that's the key to understand. When we look back at our lives, we are much more likely to have regret over inaction. And I hope that courage, again, back to Aristotle and many others after that, have described courage as the master virtue that unlocks all other virtues.
That's so profound. Before we move into the close, conscious of time, but is there anything that you can share in relation to not only resourcing ourselves, which you've shared, but actually resourcing our teams and ultimately our organizations to be more courageous?
Yeah, actually, the last one third of the book is about what I call collective courage. And I'll just summarize the idea of the last one third here is, the idea is that, you can actually, the way we talked about individual courage, you can also try to resource and build collective courage, ultimately baking it into the DNA of the organization and what I call a winning mindset. Most organizations, when they've had even the slightest amount of success, fall into what I call the success trap. They're so fearful of losing, they stop trying to win. And that's why you have so few back-to-back championships in sports. And so, you have to kind of, how do you deal with that? How do you bake winning, focus on courage, bold behavior into your culture, into your structure, into your processes? I mean, that's the kind of the last, I would say, a third of the book. And some of the similar practices we talked at the individual level are applicable, some are not at the organization level. Organizations too can tiptoe their way into uncertainty, right? Taking small steps at a time. Organizations can create conviction, or teams can create conviction as well over time. How do organizations or teams calm themselves down over time? All these things have relevance here in some different ways, but there's also this collective aspect of kind of how do you build a culture? Because culture is kind of a collective archive of habit. How do we make courage part of? And it's interesting how many companies today have courage in their official behavior statements and behind their culture, but it's just like a lip service out there.
Completely agree. Folks, go and buy the book, How to Be Bold. I love the topic. I love the way you have approached it. It's steeped in research. There's so many wonderful stories, a number of them you've kindly shared today, Ranjay. In closing, we have a tradition on the show. Can you share with our listeners three timeless takeaways?
Number one, it's okay to be scared in the face of uncertainty. Number two, you can only do so much cost benefit analysis and rationalize your way out of uncertainty. You have to, at some point, be willing to make that leap of faith. And number three, courage is a choice, and you can resource yourself and do it. I'll add fourth one, if I may. The foreword to the book is written by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and he talks about courage as an inner journey. Courage is ultimately an inner journey, even though the goal of courage may be to impact the world around us.
I love that. I mean, we would assert that scaling is an inside job. It starts from the inside out. So you mentioned the Dalai Lama. I mean, the book is endorsed by an incredible array of leaders. You had me at Alex Ferguson's or Sir Alex Ferguson's endorsement, being a long time Manchester United supporter. I only wish that he would come back,
I know.
but there we go. Ranjay, I want to thank you for sharing your time, your energy, your incredible wisdom with me today. If people want to connect with you, learn more about your work, how best to reach you?
The best way is to go on LinkedIn. I have a very active newsletter where I post every couple of weeks, a very short, pithy write up. And then, of course, I post things on LinkedIn as well. I have a website, ranjaygulati.com, where I also post stuff. So I like to put ideas out there for anybody and everybody to use. So you are all welcome to access them in any place where it's easy for you.
Well, once again, I want to thank you because you put so much incredible value out into the world. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation today. As I said, folks, go and buy the book. And I would also encourage you to explore some of Ranjay's earlier works as well. I love your deep purpose, the precursor to How to Be Bold. Ranjay, wishing you every success with the book and everything that you're doing. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, Brendan. Thank you.